Today, I am joined by Dr. Musharraf Hussain, who is a scientist, scholar, and writer. He completed a degree in biochemistry and a doctorate in it before dedicating his life to serving the Muslim community. Dr. Hussain's pursuit of Islamic knowledge led him to study under renowned scholars in Pakistan and Egypt. He's received numerous accolades for his outstanding services to community relations in Britain, including an OBE in 2008. Among his many accomplishments, Dr. Hussain has published a translation of the Quran called the Majestic Quran. He's established a radio station in Nottingham for the Muslim community, and he's also the chief executive of the Karimia Institute, also in Nottingham. So thank you, Dr. Hussain, for coming on, giving me your time. I really appreciate it.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. I'm really delighted to be with you, Hamza.
Anyway, yes, let's begin. Can you tell us a bit more about your background and what led you to study the Deen and then publish a translation of the Quran?
Okay. Well, for more than half a century, alhamdulillah, I've been learning and teaching Allah's book. So I have literally hundreds and thousands of students who I have taught, to read the Quran, to understand. And then when I found that people were struggling with the Quran translations because they were done in language, well, they were done in a language that was now outdated in Shakespearean English or in a high English or English of 1930s, because that's Pickthall's days, Abdullah Yusuf Ali's days, and even those who translated the Quran in the 80s sadly followed the same model of old language. Secondly, they didn't do something very crucial, which is they never created a narrative. They left verses separated, which really puts a lot of onus on the reader to put together and to create a narrative, which is really weird because no reader wants to take the trouble, and why should they? I mean, so the way they published Pickthall's or Abdullah Yusuf Ali's each verse on a separate line, it's not a narrative. It's like as though it's a poetry, and I don't know how and why people have been doing that, and I just really think it's time we published it and printed it in a way that is like any other textbook with headings. So mashallah, each surah, Hamza, every surah of the Quran is a self-contained unit of Tawheed, Risala, Akhirah, with different emphasis. Each has its own particular theme where it focuses, and there is a particular scheme of developing a storyline, very unique sort of ring structure. That is the structure of each surah. And there is a thematic theme to each surah, which I call the central theme, Al-Mawdu al-Markazi. And I show how it flows. And inshallah, if you look at my headings, you can begin to see how the surah is developing the storyline and where it's going. Anyway, that's about the Majestic Quran. You can read more on the website and, in fact, get it, yeah, inshallah, Aziz. And it's had an amazing success simply because readers love simple, plain English, and presentation, I think, is the key to it. Those great giants, Pickthall and Abdullah Yusuf Ali and Abdul Halim and some of the other translators were great people. They did an amazing translation. All were good translations. The only problem is I think the presentation was not something that is modern. And language also was obviously old language. And I wanted to use a language that is used in magazines, in newspapers, in textbooks. Very simple.
Mm. And as you touched on a good point about narrative, what kind of insights did you get as you were translating the narratives that you probably realized that you didn't know before?
Oh, alhamdulillah. I mean, there were so many, you can say, so many eureka moments as I was translating. But what I can say is I've seen, experienced, witnessed, and felt the miracle of the Quran. Alhamdulillah, I can claim that really because it's moved me, and it does still move me. Wherever you pick up the Quran, and if you were to read it in the right way, it will certainly touch your heart. It would certainly appeal to your reason as well, because that's something really important to remember. Quran is very, very rational, logical. In fact, it begins always, when Allah talks about himself, he says, hey, don't you look at me? خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. the creator of the heavens and the earth. Okay. جعل الشمس ضياء والقمر نورا. He made the sun a radiant, glowing ball of fire, and he made moon a reflector. So these sort of things actually draw your attention to and make you think about and accept reason. And this is really say, well, and it's not just abstract reasoning. It's actually no. Go and look. Go and see the sea. See the surges of the ocean and the tides. See the phases of the moon. Okay. Look at the day and the night. Look at the crops growing. And drying and withering, and then small seeds spurting into a new life. Real things. It's not talking about abstract philosophical reasoning about real things and nature as well. So it's really it's just amazing, to be honest. We need to have another whole podcast on this. In your godly life.
And one of the things I find really interesting when I start reading the translations is again the narrative, and also especially the humility it forces on you, because when you read, like, you open up Surah Fatiha, okay, it's easy, you understand. You read Surah Baqarah, and he's talking to the Jews, and then it takes a break and starts going through laws like, okay, this is you can get divorced now, you can eat this kind of meat, you can inherit and so on. Then it goes back and telling a story. Then the next surah is talking to the Christians. It doesn't even like. It forces you to take a step back. Hang on, look at the whole bigger picture here. God's revealed revelations throughout history, like thousands of years, and this is the last chapter. He's summing it all up, amending the law, and saying this is what's final. And then Muslims we have to kind of wait our turn, because he's addressing the people who came before. Like, these were the believers of before, and he was addressing them first. And it's like, as a father, you're a father. I'm a father recently as well. Someone told me this analogy. It's like you've got 3 kids, yeah. 2 of them, they're the eldest ones, they've messed up, they've done something wrong, and you've got the little one there, and you're telling them off, with the little one witnessing how you're telling them off. Say, look, you did this wrong, don't do that. So the little one realizes what mistakes not to make. And that's kind of how it is with the Jews and the Christians. They made some mistakes, and God's telling them off. And the Muslims
very serious mistakes.
And the Muslims are there to witness that, so that
of blasphemy,
the same thing.
Self-destruction, really. And it is divine prerogative to warn rest of humanity not to go down that route. This variety you're talking about, Hamza, in Surah Baqarah, for example, is really one of the, I used to be a teacher trainer for Gloucestershire University. So one of the signs of a good teacher is the lesson is varied and moves from one to the other. From one example to another, from one topic to another. That variety is really crucial to keeping the interest. And as we know nowadays, obviously, the attention span is growing smaller and smaller. So by having this variety, but there is an order, Hamza. These aren't just, separate topics. There is a link between them, every one of them. And so the Quran, in a way, there are sometimes there are big brackets, parentheses, when it goes to a tangent or a digression. That is actually a big parenthesis, and there's a reason for it, okay? And in fact, our minds also don't think linearly. We also think in circular ways, and these stories are really in a circular way. And as you said, the Quran starts a story, leaves it half done, starts another one, but comes back to it after 2 or 3 other events, okay? Because there was a good reason. It's also, remember, comes from an oral tradition as well. And now that we humans were weak, you see, so we needed in writing, you have to be very linear. Okay, that's the nature of writing. It's a poor writing, which we invented, particularly Western. Since Reformation, we've had this kind of linear thinking. And it doesn't work. It's not a good idea. This is why you had people like Tony Buzan talking about spider webs and spider diagrams and brainstorming and all that kind of ideas, because we don't think straight. We need to be circular. Anyway, that's another beautiful miracle of the Quran known as the ring structure. I give lectures on that as well. It's part of my book called Keys to Understanding the Quran. Come on, let's go back to your wonderful theme of climate change.
Yeah.
Before it's all about the Majestic Quran.
So there are many verses in the Quran which talk about environmental ethics, right? Things like don't waste resources, tread lightly on the earth, appreciating the blessings, the rahmah Allah sends down, the providence, the rain, respecting animals, where He says there are nations like yourselves. There's the idea of balance, the mizan, not disturb the balance. So why do you think Allah highlights the environmental issues so much? And yeah, and like what's He trying to get? What's He trying to get us to do?
Yeah,
Highlighting these
I mean,
issues.
as you said, Hamza, there's several places and passages where the Quran talks about this. For example, in Surah Ar-Rum, the very famous one, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس ليذيقهم بعض الذي عملوا. This is in Surah Ar-Rum where Allah is talking a lot about nature. There's lots of signs Allah is talking about. But here He says, then the facade has appeared on land and on sea. Facade, I translated it as pollution, contamination, wrecking the nature. Okay. So nature has been wrecked both on land and in sea, the Quran is saying. Okay. So nature has been wrecked, nature has been polluted, contaminated, damaged, both on earth and on the seas there. No? And Allah then says, لِيُزِيكَهُمْ بَعْضَ الَّذِي عَمِلُوا. We want to show them, we want them to taste some of the wrongs that their hands have done. And so that's a very powerful verse, actually, about. And we are now going through that climate crisis, which was recognized some 40, 50 years ago. But obviously, it has become very serious only over the last decade. People have taken it more seriously only recently. And this is really interesting. This is the Dajjal, the oil companies and the big giants were trying to actually say, oh, there's no problem, True, isn't it?
Yeah.
They were actually negating, oh, no, there's no problem. What are you talking about? You're just making it up. These climate scientists were really persecuted by these giant Shells and BPs and all these big companies. And then, of course, it's only recently they have now accepted it. But even there, very, very not seriously, sadly. They're not still serious about it. Their new wells are being still discovered. And even here in UK, they're opening some new oil wells, aren't they? And gas wells. So it's really, hypocrisy, and it's this trickery of capitalism, really, that is the root of it. And I think that is the issue. And Islam's way of tackling it is وَأَقِيمُ الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ, is really this idea of equilibrium. And equilibrium will only happen when you don't disturb this very sensitive. And I think what human beings didn't recognize and over the last 300 years is how sensitive the nature is. Do you understand that, Hamza? They thought we could wreck it. They thought we could pump billions and billions of tons of CO2 in the orbit, in the atmosphere, and it'll be okay. They didn't realize that, my goodness, even a 1.5 degrees change, you might think, what is 1.5 degree change? My goodness, that is how sensitive. And parts per million of your nasty chemicals could lead to the, to the extinction of many fish, many species of sea animals, as well as on land, Jen. We didn't think that things would be so sensitive, because we're so crude and hand-fisted, ruthless, capitalist human beings, greedy human beings. That's really the problem. I think it's been this greed, sadly, and still, and even when I hear, Hamza, these people talking about wanting to deal with climate crisis, you still see greed there. It's about how can we exploit the new technologies. If you look at the language of politicians and capitalists, it's how can we exploit the new technologies in order to get richer? Not for the good of humanity, not to save humanity, sadly. So our intentions still are bad. and this is the nature of kufr, sadly. I mean, I don't need to fear, and we need to be clear on this. This is a Dajjali age and Dajjali people and Dajjali capitalism. It will never learn from its mistakes, serious mistakes. It will continue to do that. And the only thing that will bring light to it is to accept the reality that greed is not good for you.
Yeah, there's a hadith of the Prophet, I think, where he says, or it might be worse in the Quran, I'm not sure now, where it says the the unbeliever has seven stomachs, right? When it's referencing not just gluttony in food, it represents like just how much they consume of the earth as well.
Yes.
And
yes, that's a hadith term. It's a hadith term. Okay, and and uh, uh, and then the Quran, is very clear. In the Quran, it says, whoever is able to save themselves from greed are successful. If you can save yourself from greed, you are then going to be. In other words, if you keep on following your greedy instincts, you will never succeed. And we still have but then that's the nature of kufr. Kufr is about greed. Kufr is about dunya. Kufr is about accumulation and amassing. And this is what the Makkans were. Makkans were materialist, greedy, idolaters. That's what they were. They were materialists, like modern materialists, really. And the Quran challenges them, tells them, look, you are khasirun, you will be khasirun if you don't change your attitude. And I think that's the message we need to be giving out, inshallah al-Aziz.
So if we observe the UK and look at the Muslims here, we live in like the most dirty areas. We don't recycle that much. We waste a lot of food. Even look at Ramadan and our food ethics. It's like we starve ourselves for a certain period, then we eat like pigs at iftar, which is not in the spirit of Ramadan. Like we don't live very sustainable lives. Why is it that we have the Quran, we have the message from God, right, telling us how to live, but we don't follow it up in our actions?
Well, that's a very good question, Hamza. And what you're really hinting to is that if we were to adopt a very simple, frugal lifestyle, we would be able to overcome the problems of climate crisis, really. And for this, the Quran has many terms. It uses many powerful terms, as I mentioned in my article on sparse living. It talks about israf, which is wasting, okay? Tabzir, which is again about squandering. Abbas, which is about, thinking that they're useless, futile things, therefore we can use them as we like. Or lagh, which is about being purposeless. Or la'ab, which is about being something which is just game and play and not serious. It's really interesting to look at these 5 Quranic terms. And if we look at them, Hamza, they will really explain to us, they will teach us that Islam, people ask, how do you live a simple, purposeful, meaningful, frugal life where there isn't waste? You're not a consumerist, but you are a human being who eats enough, to live a decent, clean, and good life. Okay, you can't call you a consumerist because if you're consuming, and everybody needs a different amount of energy. For example, big guys, let's say 6 foot, big guy who's 90 kilos, would need something like 2,500 calories. Somebody who's smaller than that, 5'8", would be and 70 kilos would need something like 2,000 calories. And a lady would need 1,800, for example, and so on. And if you consume that much, that is your need. That is your natural and real need. But if you were to instead consume 5,000, that is consumerist. That is waste. And then if you were to eat only half of your plate and throw the other away, that is another, israf and tabzir. And Quran calls such people innal mubadhirina kanu ikhwan ash-shayatin, the brothers and sisters of the devil. This is a very harsh word, isn't it? I think many of us will feel very disturbed by it, but that is what the Quran calls this. These are mubazzirin. These are actually the brothers and sisters of the devil. And so we really do need to be very careful, about this there. No, so those the and of course, then you have this amazing role model of Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is who's a great living example of frugality, simplicity, and so yes, we have all, the deen has a very clear message for us, very clear teachings, and we need to make those more clearer, Hamza, I think, to the society. But one thing I will stand up for Muslims is this: Alhamdulillah, we are still people who haven't got. I better be careful. I hope many of us still don't have a wasteful attitude to life. I think there is still the sense that we've got to avoid waste. But I think there needs to be more teaching on it. My article I wrote to you, sent to you about extravagance. I think we need to make those teachings more common, so people know that this is serious as this. You are shaitan's brother and sister.
Indeed.
If you are constantly ordering from your takeaways, food being delivered to you, whereas you can't do your own cooking for yourself, you see, and not wash, you just don't know how they cook. Do they say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in McDonald's? Do they have their hands pure? Do they have their the food source? Is it from pure? Who knows? Mm-hmm. And is it any wonder that there's very little barakah in that food, and our health and everything, psychologically, spiritually, and physically, Jana. So really need to be very careful what we really consume and how it's cooked, and how much of it we consume. And the Quran is very clear, the Hadith is very clear. So we need to really build this mindset, where we believe that when we are washing our hands, we need to be very careful not to waste. I don't know, Hamza, if you've seen our African brothers, Muslim brothers doing wuzu in Africa. I traveled to Africa, Gambia,
they're very
Nigeria.
frugal with water. Yeah.
Sorry?
They're very frugal with water.
Yes, and have you seen what they do? This is what can you believe they can easily do a wuzu with 100 mil?
Wow.
What?
I said,
with
wow.
100? I said, Sean, I can do it as well. And what it is, you just put a little bit and you do this. Have you seen them rubbing?
Yeah, no, if you use a spray.
And that is actually sunnah as well. Malkis are very strict about the rubbings. You rub your arms like that. And of course, that's good for your it makes you more active, and all the nerves are stimulated, and it's really good. And same with your face and the neck and your feet. And you can do it with 100 mil. 200 mils, okay, maximum. But how much do we do? 3 or 4 liters? 5 liters? 10, 20 times more than is needed. So, but you might say, oh, what is that to do with saving the planet? People who cannot be careful with small things are not going to be careful with big things either. So this is why those people who've got power, at one time, they were like me and you. But now they've got billions and trillions, and they've got so much power. And because they're used to wastage, it doesn't really worry them. They'll fly on private jets. They will do all sorts of things because it doesn't really, that is their mindset has been. So even, people say to me, Doctor, what difference does that make? This water saving. Well, I said, it's not about that. It's about your attitude towards Allah's creation and your respect for it, or disrespect. So that's why, we do need to be very careful everywhere.
Interestingly, there's a lot of countries now having groundwater issues because of climate change. So water is actually very scarce. It's becoming an increasingly scarce resource. It might not feel like in England, it rains so much, but around the world, it's a very precious resource now because there's not
absolutely enough. And many of the world wars are going to be around that. To be honest, people, places like Pakistan and India will be fighting over the water that comes from the Himalayas.
Yeah, especially as the rivers dry up,
diverted to one side rather than the other, and you have very, very serious everywhere in the world. It's already happening, say in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Eritrea and Sudan, where Ethiopia is about to build a dam, which of course supplies the source of river Nile. So what will happen? So, countries then fight over it. They are already fighting in a very different way, sadly, and creating, real wars, real wars.
Yeah, one of like part of our lives today really these very like high consumerist lifestyles. Everything's designed for mass consumption. Like even things like when we're cooking or preparing food, we use cling film. I was talking to someone on my podcast earlier. She's from Kenya and she's a ranger. She said she's found cling film or plastic brands in the stomachs of animals in Kenya
Yes.
from the UK and the US. Like,
Yeah.
but we don't notice these things. Or even
Well, you know what happens here, sadly, we're rich enough to be able to export our waste.
yeah,
That is how mad it has become. These countries are so poor, they will allow the waste of, the citizens of Nottingham, of UK, to be thrown into Gambia, into Nigeria, into Kenya, into their dams and beautiful countryside and into their lakes. Yes, yes, this is the sad reality of a consumer society. Madness, of course, if any human beings thinks about how mad and foolish could you get than that. But who's fool? Those leaders of those countries who are not bothered about it, and the fools here, who can allow such things to happen. I hope you can see this is the Dajjal. This is the trickery, the deception of our society at every level, sadly,
yeah,
because we are disobeying that law of Allah of being frugal and simple. We are over consuming, and in order to continue that madness, we do these silly things, absolutely silly things.
yeah.
May Allah protect us from the
Even
madness of
nappies,
this.
even nappies, right? When you have a baby,
Yes.
every single nappy that you throw away does not degrade at all. So it's going to stay there in landfill forever, which is tragic for the environment, especially
Yes, and
given
there
how
are
babies.
alternatives to all these things.
Yeah,
Using towels and all those things can be done and reuse. The three R's of being environmentally friendly. Repair, reuse, and recycle is so crucial. This is very Islamic. This is Islamic, really. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we know that he used to mend his own sandals. He could have got new ones, but no, mending. Putting patches on his clothes, whereas we throw them away. Not even torn ones, we just throw away because we've used them twice, and that's enough. We've got enough money to buy more. If we don't have money, we can get credit. It's okay, no problem. They say you can pay in 3 years' time, and they'll have built 10 times more interest on it. This is the consumer madness. What else can you say to it? I just don't know, honestly, other than to laugh and the stupidity of human beings. Sofaha, the Quran calls them, the fools, okay? And that's what happens to you. Yet they claim to be what? Oh, we are the most intelligent. We are the most civilized people. And you say, wow, goodness, look at this civilization. Eh? So crass, so wretched, and even the poor insects are not safe now. I was hearing about the other day about sonar pulses from ships and submarines, how they can rupture the brains of dolphins, sharks, and fish and other sea animals. Constantly, they're sending out these sonar pulses, and sound energy is very powerful. You know that. You know, if you've got, may Allah protect you, Hamza, from gallstones and kidney stones, but those kidney stones, you can't actually smash them with a hammer, but you can smash them into pieces with ultrasound. That is how powerful the
wow.
ultra sound energy is. Sound energy is very, very powerful. And they are sending these out constantly, these ships and submarines, which is then leading to either these animals going crazy or dying eventually. Yeah. So, yes, we are causing Zahar al Fasad fil Barri wal Bahr, the Quran says. This facade, this harm, this contamination and pollution has occurred, and havoc has been wreaked on this beautiful blue planet by human activities.
Yeah. Um, so you've talked about like some of the environmental problems there are, like what the Quran says about them. I want to take a step back and have a look at a bigger picture of this all. When Allah sends revelations to people, as He has done in the past, and He did 1,400 years ago to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what's the impact of the Quran meant to look like? Because we saw how the Jahili Arabs were the kind of the worst ignorant people on the planet. They were burying their own daughters, they were materialistic, they're doing all sorts of nonsense things. But suddenly the Quran changed them, right? So when Allah sends down revelation, what does He want it to? What's the impact He wants it to have on
Yes.
us?
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, we might laugh at the foolishness of the Arab consumerists and Meccan idolaters. But to be honest, they weren't that bad, you know, compared to the modern idolater of Paris and New York and of London. Seriously. In fact, we are perhaps doing 100 times more evil things. You know, they might do infanticide. They might kill their daughter once in a while. Here, we're killing is the abortion rate and the things that we do here is at about 250,000 a year.
Wow.
So let's be realistic about things, you know, Hamza. When we look at things like that, the modern materialist, the modern consumerist, the modern kafir, the modern dajjal is far more vicious, far more dangerous than those Meccan idolaters, to be honest. So I think we really need to be uh, really careful about making those sort of comparisons with those old idolaters of past. They were vicious, yes, but not as vicious as modern. They would normally, you know, in battles, they would only fight those who came to fight them. They wouldn't attack somebody who's not attacking them because, you know, so
No,
today,
I'm not saying that we're better than them. I'm saying look how the Quran transformed them into the
yes,
status.
yes.
And
Well, that might be the reason. Okay, they weren't so vicious and so bad as we are. So today's kafir is so black-hearted and so stone-hearted that it will take a lot of hard work to convert them to reality and to knock sense into them because they are completely intoxicated with the love of dunya, consumerism, and they are actually lost. I'm not saying it's impossible. Of course, it's possible that they too can be transformed, and the Quran can have impact. But it will have impact if people knew it, if people saw, if we Muslims ourselves acted on it and became role models of people who love the nature, who respect nature, who care for nature, who do not waste, okay, and who can live so frugally. So if we can show that, Hamza, I can live on just, you know, these 1900 calories a day. I can live with just 2 or 3 pairs of shoes, not 15 or 20 pairs, which is sadly the average in UK. Do you know that?
no,
You know, these, yes, average woman might have about 15 pairs of shoes. Okay. Men might have about 10. All right. So, you know, we need to be asking, why would you want so much? And the wardrobes are full of, you know, at least 100 dresses would be perhaps normal for most women, and men perhaps, I don't know, 20 or 30. So when you look at this madness and wastage, just because we can afford it, if we can't afford it, we can borrow money. The banks are only too pleased to lend you because they're going to charge you interest, and they can make this false money. Governments are happy for you to. In fact, they get very upset, the governments, uh, uh, when the consumers spend less money. Isn't that true?
yeah, we have a system where we're kind of locked into economic
So
growth.
the whole point is to keep the economic wheel spinning faster and faster. And this is called, you know, increase in growth rate, you know, higher GDPs. But what they don't realize is at what cost, and who's the cost to? It's to our poor planet. And of course, to our sanity as well. So, but these are questions, Hamza, which modern politicians and materialists would never want to tackle and want to talk about.
Yeah.
When did you hear any politician talk like that? They won't, because they're only interested in one thing. How
In
can we
fact,
keep the economic
interestingly,
wheel turning faster and faster?
even the measure of GDP, technically, if you go out and destroy nature, let's say you pollute a river, and then you spend money to fix it, technically you've increased GDP because
Yes, yes, yes.
it's a
Well,
man
and
driven
isn't
measure.
this what the Quran calls innal mubazzirina kanu ikhwana shayatin. The squanderers are the brothers and sisters of the devil.
Yeah.
These are the devilish activities that we are, and this is devil doing this so as to keep us busy with making and breaking, sweeping and destroying, and consuming and producing this everlasting cycle, so that we don't worship Allah, we don't think about reality, we don't think where we are going, what is our destination. This is all about, sadly, it has that connotation from a spiritual perspective.
Mm. And as you mentioned it before, the Quran talks about these things so much, right? But we have to know, we have to showcase it, we have to know it ourselves. But if you look in the UK, the vast majority of Muslims are not familiar with the Quran very well,
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They might
I think,
regurgitate it in Arabic
yes.
in the madrasas. Even myself, when I was in school, my parents would send me 2 hours a day after school to go to madrasa and just read the Arabic. Now at this point, like, I feel like that's wasted activity because I've not understood any of what I was just making Arabic sounds, reflecting on that now.
Yes.
So, but there's also this idea of like reading Quran in Arabic, even if you don't understand it, you get rewards for it. So I want to ask you about that. Like, technically, there's no benefit for us when we're reading in Arabic, right? Because we're not understanding it, and Allah has revealed the Quran for us to understand, to implement, to act upon. But if we read
Yes.
it without understanding and just make the sounds, is that really
Okay.
rewarded?
I think what we need to be able to distinguish is the words of Allah, the kalimatullah, being in Arabic, having a very special status and a very spiritual impact, the words of Allah. However, the Quran wasn't revealed just for recitation, at holy events. It was actually revealed so that we may understand it. Yeah. This is why the Quran keeps on saying, "Afala ta'qilu." Do you not understand? Afala tatadabbaru. Don't you reflect on it? And you can't have reflection and you can't have understanding until actually you know the language. So, in other words, translation is what you should be reading for purposes of understanding the message and the contents of the Quran. And of course, we need to read the Quran in its original Arabic in order to connect with Allah in the sense of spirituality, okay, for spiritual purposes. It has its own impact, no doubt about it. But to be honest, الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابِ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ. The Quran says, those to whom we gave the book, read it as it ought to be read. Read it as it ought to be read simply means, what does it mean? It's obvious. When you read something, you've got to understand it. If you don't understand it, well, you are not doing justice to it. So Quran's just doing justice to the Quran means you have to read translation. So in my own Quran schools, which we run at Karimia, we now have everybody around the age of 8 who can read English. They have to read the Quran translation. So they're reading Arabic, but they have to read translation. So they are getting used to it. They're getting habituated. They're getting, almost conditioning them. Just like you've been conditioned to read in Arabic, we need to now condition children to read in the translation so they know what they are reading. And it's then they will benefit. It's then they will learn that israf is wasting, using more than is necessary. Tabzir, it is squandering, obviously more than that. It is making something, regarding something useless, abas, whereas there is nothing that is abas. It's really interesting, Hamza. The Quran uses some of the names of surahs are named after small insects.
Mm-hmm.
An-Nahl, the bee, is a very famous one. Ankabut, the spider. And you might say, what, a spider? This little insect, useless. And people are scared of it sometimes. Why? And this little bee, why? The cow. Why does the Quran name things? And it is to show, look, you fools might not know what they are for, what their benefit is. I know. And of course, a few years ago, when scientists found that the bee population in the UK was declining, the farmers were complaining that their crop yield was falling. The harvest was falling. Why? Because there were less bees to pollinate. And as a consequence, the harvest went down. And they calculated that they would need £4 billion worth of labor to compensate for that bees, low bee. Can you see that? Things that we humans think are useless, and oh, that little insect, what is this bee? Allah
Even
says, well,
spiders, right? Their webs, they tend to catch
yes,
flies and all these like insects you don't want going to your crop.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously now scientists are beginning to, the wise scientists are now beginning to understand, okay, wow, there is nothing in Allah's creation of the 12 million species of animals and plants. That's the sort of rough estimate we have of living species of plants and animals, 12 million. We know around about 2 million, that have been categorized or put into species and groups and orders. But what is really interesting is they are now beginning to recognize not a single one of them is useless. And this is why we're worried about when there's an extinction of a species, what impact that will have on the food chain, what impact that will have on the environment from which it is missing. And we just don't know. It will be so devastating. SubhanAllah, this is Allah's creation. Amazing. And, we just need to have that, understanding of the greatness of Allah and respecting that. They said that the Red Indians, when the Europeans went to America and killed and did a genocide of those Red Indian natives. But what they found in those people was how gentle they were, the way they walked on earth. And the Quran talks about this actually. It's really وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. Allah says that the servants of Allah, the servants of the Most Kind are those who walk humbly on earth. But modern man, our presidents and our prime ministers, have you seen them? The way they walk? Arrogantly. Nose up. That little George Bush that used to be president of America? Have you ever, he's a little guy there, no? But the way he used to walk and the way the American cameras and media used to show him as though he's very big, tall and his head up, typical arrogance. When you have that kind of arrogance in you, sadly, you are not going to have humility. You're not going to be the protectors of this earth, but destroyers of it, sadly. And that is what we see around us.
Exactly, yeah. Just bringing it back to that point about the Quran literacy, because, yeah, you're right. If we don't understand the Quran, how are we going to connect to Allah? And if we can't connect to Allah, then you're not going to respect the earth and His creation.
So we need to, I think AFIS, your organization, really needs to think very seriously how we can educate our young people. And I'll help you with that, putting together these Quranic solutions to environmental crisis. So I'd be very happy to develop, something very simple. It doesn't have to be tens of pages. Very simple, 1 page, 2 page sort of summary of what the Quran is saying about human beings, the Khalifatullahs, the representatives of Allah on earth. That the Christians use an interesting term for this Khalifatullah, steward. Mm-hmm. The steward is there to take care of things, isn't he? They have these football stewards, don't they? Or we used to have them. I don't know what they call them nowadays, but these guys who used to run around the perimeter of the football pitch, making sure there's nothing thrown in or
they still do that. Yeah.
Oh, they still do them. Yeah. I don't know what they call them, but
Stewards,
that's what a steward is, to make sure that we take care. Not that we destroy it, not that we bulldoze it, not that we do, earth crushers. We use earth crushers. Can you imagine how we use the earth crushers to dig into the earth, okay, in order to get this black gold, so that, we can have big banks and we can have these big, 100-story skyscrapers. It's a madness that comes from a particular kind of mindset, which is wholly unspiritual, to be honest.
Yeah, and I like what you're doing with the translation in your education centers, because if I think about it now, like, let's say from the age of back in my generation, when we were told to read the Quran as an example, every Ramadan do a khatam of the Quran in Arabic, right? Now let's imagine you've got 1 million kids doing that for 10 years. So that's in 10 years they've read the Quran 10 times in Arabic, though, so they've not understood a word. And just imagine if they read it in English 10 times, how that would transform their relationship with Allah.
Well, absolutely.
The actions that would come as a consequence, and the benefit that'll generate over the 10 years, and how they'd pass that information along to their children as well. Like, just reading the Quran itself is a transformational act, because it's going to transform the way you interact with nature, with the world, with other people, and it's going to put you on a better course.
Yes, and we need to be, as I said, the Quran's literacy needs to be made more common, and we need to share that. And when you share that, that's when the impact comes. Let me just share with you just one particular teachings of the Quran, which is, let's just look at the Quran's ruling about alcohol. It's forbidden. So what happens? Alhamdulillah, Muslims don't drink. Majority, 95+%, inshallah, or even more. Let me be a bit positive about them. Won't drink. So what? Well, you just need to look at the horrible impact of alcohol on British society. You know what it is? Let me share some nasty figures with you.
It's the worst drug around.
In 2021, the NHS said that they had 20,000 deaths directly due to alcohol in a year. Okay. Then the impact on the economy was something like, I don't know, was it 20 odd billion on the economy. Okay. And then the impact on families and the society and crimes. I mean, it's just unimaginable. So I hope you can see, the Quran's impact is huge. It does have impact.
And
its rulings do have impact.
When it comes to alcohol, and reduction in fornication as well when it comes to alcohol.
Of course, well, a lot of crimes are done under the influence of the police will tell you that most of the crimes are actually done under the influence of alcohol. So it will reduce that considerably. And then you have gambling. Similarly, the addiction to that again leads to family breakage, so much harm done. So you can just imagine, one teaching of Quran has made so much impact. What about if we followed all these other teachings, particularly, as you said, about nature and about climate? And I think that's where people like yourself, Hamza, and your organization needs to be working on. How do we implement those beautiful teachings of the Quran? So you need to do something, inshallah. We can talk more about that afterwards, how we can actually take steps to educate young people, to follow these Quranic teachings for their own sanity. Many people will say, well, what is my little action going to have? What impact is that going to have on all of the climate crisis? Well, it's 1.6 billion Muslims. Okay. That's nearly a quarter of humanity. It certainly will have an impact. No doubt. We will have
most
huge
of the
impact.
Muslim ummahs are actually going to be subject to the adverse effects of climate change. I mean, look what's happening in Palestine. That's a small group of Muslims there in Palestine. Think about the Muslims in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Africa, in Arabia, in all.
Yes, everybody will be affected by it.
Yeah.
And so we need to be preparing for that, and also to be at the moment trying to save as much as we can, inshallah Aziz. But I think what should be underlying all this is the fear of Allah, the love of Allah, and love of nature, and really, and that is what will actually lead. When you have that love of Allah and love of nature, your mind becomes very different. It's not interested in designer clothing now. It's not interested in having, is it Porsche or Lamborghini, or having a big mansion, or doing these, travels to outside countries regularly just because you want a holiday and to be keeping up with your journeys. You will be able to overcome that kind of nonsense only if you've got that fear of Allah in your heart, and you're connected with the nature through Allah, because we connect with nature because this is Allah's ayah. These are ayatullah. Okay, they are Allah's clear signs hinting to, and they are Allah's creation. Allah made them, and Allah wants us to enjoy them and really benefit from them in that way. So inshallah, there's so much, alhamdulillah, we can do. I think the Quran has a great deal to give. We can have a huge impact on our own, carbon footprint if we Muslims did this, inshallah.
I think part of the issue, as you mentioned, education is like a lot of Muslims nowadays, to get the education from the khutbah, from like social media, right? But in the khutbah, it's usually irrelevant. Like when have you heard a imam talk about climate change or something
Yes.
that's
Well,
tangible?
because they haven't been educated, and that's, I think,
Yeah.
where organization like yours needs to be giving out these kind of 1 page, 2 page uh, newsletters to them to use this for your khutbah to emphasize and in order to educate young people about it, inshallah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's time's coming to a close. Thank you very much for coming on. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure our audience will enjoy it as well.